Hi, my name's Cash and you're watching Cashed Out Cars. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to do something that lots of Miata owners will need to do at some point in their lives, and that is remove a differential from their car. This is going to be a clear and concise guide on how to get this job done, and let's get right into it. The first thing that you're going to need to do is remove your axle nut. That's the big nut here that's on that splined piece. And to do that, you need to sort of knock this nut out of the way because they do get hammered into that notch right there to lock in so it can't back off on you. So I started out by actually using this angled punch and going straight in to initially get that edge hit out. And then I switched over to a bigger one to really force that thing the rest of the way. Now you need to get this thing out of the way enough so that nut will be able to turn and you'll be able to back it off. These things are torqued to pretty extreme levels because you absolutely don't want your axle nuts coming out. And oftentimes you'll be able to get them with the impact gun. But the best thing that I've found is using a really long pole on a breaker bar. This makes it extremely easy, and I've had much better results doing that than using a impact gun. Also, I will note that you only need to remove your axle nuts if you're removing your axles. If you're not, you usually could work around them and get the diff out. And just like that, the axle nut is off. Alright, so now we're at the back of the car under it. As you can see, obviously here's our diff here. And the things that we need to remove to get that diff down are these two bolts right here that go up through the power plant frame. They go into some pressed in inserts that sit in the top of this frame. And then we need to remove our axles. On this one, this is a 1.6 liter diff, and the early 1.8s will also have this. You have stub axles that come out of the diff to the rest of the axle. And then if we look over here, again, here's the diff. Over here at the end of the diff carrier, we have those three small nuts right there and that big one, and then the diff will be able to drop down. So I would highly recommend getting a lot of penetrant oil on these things before you attempt this job. It will make it go a lot easier, and if you do have rust on them, definitely wire brush these things because otherwise you might be breaking those studs off and you're going to have a bad time if that happens. If you follow this channel for my car and not just for help right now, one, I would recommend subscribing, but two, I could see that the nuts here that are holding this axle on tried to self-clearance just a little bit with my exhaust here on my turbo setup. That was just because this was basically my first complete turbo build. I built this whole exhaust by myself and it just hit a little bit. So I'll adjust that a little bit, but once I have one-piece axles in here, it should actually not really be a big problem. And the other thing that you need to take off, which actually is what I'm going to do first, is the nuts that hold the drive shaft onto the diff. This is what we're going to start with here. You may need to take the e-brake off, put the car in neutral, and then spin your drive shaft so you could access all of those nuts, but these are normally pretty easy to get off. Now we're going ahead and removing those axle nuts. Once again, if you have a later car, if you have an NB or a early NA that hasn't been diff swapped already, you're not going to have stub axles here and you're going to have one-piece axles that will pull right out. Next up, you're going to need to break out the heavy artillery because we're at the hardest part of this job, which is getting out these two power plant frame bolts. Now, these go up into an insert in the top of the power plant frame, which I talked about before, and hopefully the inserts won't spin, but it's very likely that they will. I would recommend that you put some penetrating oil on the top of these bolts to help them come out easier, but we'll see how it goes right now. Oh my God, that was easy. Oh my God, I literally cannot believe that just happened. That was so freaking easy. Alright, so this is the third one I've done. It never goes this easy. This basically took no effort. It just took the impact gun, and these things are free. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull these out, and then I'll show you the next step. There's one of the bolts so you could see it. And let's get this other one out. Next thing we need to do here is get this spacer just down a little bit. This, once again, is just a press fit. There's a notch in it there that you could get a pry bar in. Pry that thing down, and then your diff will be free from the power plant frame, and we'll be able to move it out of the way. To get that spacer out, I went ahead and used this big pry bar. I got it into the slot in that spacer and just pried it down out of the way. Now I'm going to go ahead and use a chisel. It's important to evenly get this thing out. You don't want to go a lot on one side because then you're going to twist it in the hole and it's going to bind up. So you want to just carefully work your way around it. There may be a different way to do it, but to get these axles out, what I like to do is remove this upper control arm here, and then you'll be able to flex out your knuckle, give yourself a little bit more room, and get that axle out. Even if you have two-piece axles like I do here, I was having a little bit of trouble popping them out, so this will give us the room that we need. And just like that, the axle just popped out. This one was actually way easier to move than I was expecting it to be, but that was perfect. Alright, I really can't make this up. This has been going absolutely fantastic, and compared to every other time that I did this job, everything on my car is just really easy. The next thing that you have to do is get the axles out of place, and you do need to do this to remove the axles if you're doing that. If you're just removing the diff, you could leave the axles in the hubs and just slide them out of the way to get your diff out. But I've seen the axles completely frozen in these hubs before. Mine are not frozen at all. I just gave it a light tap before to see if it would move. And it's literally taking no force to drive this thing out. And I've never seen that happen with the other couple times that I did this job. So that's awesome. You might have a harder time with that. If you have a hard time with that, you need to hit this with a brass hammer so you don't damage the axle. Or you could take your axle nut and screw it on there backwards like this so you have a nice big surface to hit with a hammer, and then you could hit it that way. The important thing is you don't want to peen over the outside of that axle. Alright, so now our axles are out of the way, and the last thing holding that diff in are those two big bolts, one on each side, and then the two smaller bolts, two on each side. Now's the point where you need to put a jack under your diff so it's supporting the weight of the diff. These things are heavy and you don't want them falling on you, and you want the jack there to help you lower this thing out of place. One thing I will note is a lot of the time it's easier to remove your exhaust and then drop the diff. I'm going to try not to remove my exhaust because I don't really feel like removing it, but it will save you a little bit of time trying to finagle the thing out of there if there's no exhaust in the way. So now all that's left holding the diff in is those two bolts. And let me repeat, that diff is heavy and you don't want it falling on you, so be careful, and it's not a bad idea to have someone help you get that diff out of there. Now let's remove those two bolts and drop this thing out of place. So right now we're going ahead and removing those big bolts that hold the diff in place. While we were trying to get the diff out here, I remembered that you do need to knock those spacers up out of the power plant frame. Those are the ones that were pressed in that your long power plant frame bolts threaded into, and you do need to get those out. To do that, I went ahead and threaded the bolts back into them, hit them upwards with a hammer, and they popped out, and then you could remove those long bolts. So I would recommend doing that first so you don't have to go back and do it later. Then we were able to carefully lower this diff out of the car and basically get it out of the way. And there it is. The diff is now out of the car. In my case, I'm upgrading this thing to a 1.8 diff since my car is turbocharged and the 1.6 diffs don't handle power very well. So that's what's going to be going into mine. You could see videos on that in the future. If you have any questions or comments about this video that I didn't cover, go ahead and leave them below. And also let me know what you're doing with your differentials. Are you upgrading it? Are you putting a welded diff in? Did your 1.6 diff blow? Did your 1.8 diff blow? I want to hear from you guys. So leave that down below. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more. I hope you stick around for the next one.